In today's podcast, we are speaking with Dan Kleber, who is an associate professor at the Labouré College of Healthcare just outside of Boston. Dan has been a member of the faculty for over 30 years, established and directed the online learning program for 22 years, and has a master's degree in psychology. Welcome to the podcast, Dan.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Well, why don't you first tell us a little bit about your career and your background?
I started off doing some clinical work after I graduated and had the opportunity to teach a couple of courses and found that I really enjoyed teaching quite a bit and gravitated more and more toward teaching and away from clinical work as the demands sort of increased and it was difficult to do both full time. And that's I kind of found a home without really, looking for it. I've been there for quite a bit of my life now.
Had you ever done any teaching before your work at Labouré?
I had done a short stint before graduate school. I had done a short stint of teaching high school and enjoyed that as well, but didn't see myself doing that for the long run.
Okay. Is public speaking something that came naturally to you?
I don't know if it comes or came naturally to me. I think it's certainly something that becomes more comfortable with practice. The more I have done it, the more easily I find it. And I think going into unfamiliar circumstances, that sort of reservoir of experiences helps out a lot. But I think early on, I know that some people are deathly afraid of it. Maybe I had enough experiences talking in front of people that I wasn't deathly afraid of it, but it is definitely something that has become more comfortable as time goes on.
What kind of challenges did you feel you had to overcome in kind of getting more comfortable?
Well, I think that you need to be comfortable with the material you're presenting and confident in the material you're presenting, because if I'll speak for myself, if I'm not comfortable or confident, I'm really looking for so much feedback from the people I'm speaking to that it becomes a distraction. And so the more comfortable I am with that material, the more easily I'm going to move through it. And I'm still trying to read the room, but I'm not looking for every intonation. I'm not looking for every smile or every nod. Because I know and I'm comfortable with what I want to go forward with.
That's interesting because my background is not education but business, but it's the same thing. The comfort level and knowledge of your content to me is what's going to drive your comfort with speaking. Is if you know what you're talking about, you'll do much better. What are the challenges that you find in working with today's students?
Uh, I think we have students working at a kind of a variety of different levels, and in particular, at the college that I have been with has a variety of different age levels, different comfort levels with technology, the proximity that they have to having graduated from high school. Sometimes they just graduated last year. Sometimes it's 5 years ago. Sometimes it's 25 years ago, and so you really have a different set of experiences and comfort levels for all those students. And so that's probably one of the challenges is being prepared to support those students that need more support without necessarily slowing down everything so that the students who don't need support are bored and restless and don't want to be a part of it.
Interesting. Now you've been at Labouré for over 30 years. How have the challenges changed over the course of that 30-year period?
Well, when I first started, there was no online presence. There was nothing that approximated that. So all my courses were face to face, and you're speaking to a full room of people, and so those dynamics of how to keep the class engaged and how to deliver the material, how to hold people accountable, that was kind of in one mode. And then when things started to move online, it was a different mode, a different way of presenting material, a different way of keeping people engaged, probably a different way of letting students know that I was engaged, because I'm not sitting there in front of them anymore. And so how, the challenge of how do I let them know that this is a topic that interests me, this is a topic that I think could interest you. Here is why I think it's important that you know these things. I think that becomes more challenging when you aren't kind of interacting in real time, face to face.
Interesting. What presentation skills do you find most important in communicating with students today?
I think clarity, and that's not new. I don't think that, and it certainly isn't particular to education. But I think students want to know what's expected of them, and if you can lay that as a foundation, then you might be able to get people to be more engaged and interested to go just beyond what do I have to do for this class or this week, this assignment. I think that's significant. I think I think conveying a level of genuineness is important. I think if if students sense that I'm not interested in the material, or that I'm acting, it's not that hard to figure out that somebody's acting interested. So it helps me when going through the material identify the things that I'm really interested in. This is really genuinely interesting to me, because I can convey that level of interest. If I end up thinking this is something which doesn't excite me, that's not the worst thing in the world to tell them. This part of this section we're going to talk about, I don't find the most interesting, but I do think you still need to know it. And that comes across, I think, as much more genuine than trying to fake interest.
Interesting. I like that. Just, the genuineness. When I would work with clients in business, one of the things that they seemed to was almost disarming to them was when I would be honest with them if I couldn't do something. It's like the idea a salesperson's always saying everything is perfect, and I would say, no, we're not perfect at this, but we're really good at that. And so that genuineness was also important there. Um, how comfortable are students with public speaking? We are dealing with an online world. Students have a presence kind of to the rest of the world today that we didn't have when we were younger. What is your experience with them, especially now that so much of it is online? What's their comfort level with all of this?
I think there are still there's still a range of comfort, with the students, and maybe particularly because of the population that we deal with that ranges so widely in age and experience. So you have some students who are very comfortable. We may have a live online meeting, and I am not requiring them to put cameras on. So some of them never put their cameras on. Others put their cameras on, and they're much more willing to engage. When we're dealing with a face-to-face class, one of the obstacles is that very often you get the same half dozen people who are participating, and the others might be participating by listening, but they aren't actively engaged. And I think that's true probably either way. If you are having a kind of a synchronous, online meeting, then you're going to get the same people asking questions that you had before. Often I'll end up saying, if you guys are all done, that's great. You can take off. I'm going to hang around for a few minutes afterwards just to see if people have residual questions kind of going out the door. And you sometimes get those people who are hesitant to say anything in front of the classmates, but they might stick around for a few minutes and ask a question there.
It's interesting. It reminds me of in business, you would see, especially as we transitioned from more of a face-to-face to an online, especially post-COVID, and there were people who were older, and they clearly were uncomfortable being on camera. And others, they might kind of get on and say, hey, I'm here for 2 minutes, and then they're going to go off camera, where others, are clearly comfortable with it, certainly the younger ones. in my role in sales, you had to be on camera. And so there's just a different cultural expectation for just being present and being seen. And I would imagine certainly the younger ones who are used to being in social media, it's much more natural for them.
Yeah. It's as far as technology goes, I think, you know, it, there's a general comfort level that younger people have with it because they've been exposed to it for a larger portion of their lives or their entire lives. It doesn't mean that they necessarily have some inherent knowledge of every technology. So sometimes they need some help and guidance if you have something specific you want them to do. But it's not it's more complicated for those people who don't even have that sort of base level of comfort with technology.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you ever run into people who just seem to be totally novice about using computers and cameras and microphones and all of that?
I, I, I probably have more people who are more anxious that they don't have the skills required than they don't actually have those skills. So you'll have people say, "I don't know anything about computers. I don't know anything about how to do any of this stuff." And I'll say, "Well, do you ever use email?" And say, "Oh yeah, I use email." It's like, "Well, have you ever done this? Have you ever done that? Have you ever, watched a video on YouTube?" Have you, and then all of a sudden it's like, "Oh yeah, okay." So if you've got these kind of basic set of skills, you really don't have. There's not a lot missing. So we're going to sort of work through some of what you might want to see that will look a little different than what you're used to. But it's all still the same basic skills. You're 90% there.
So it comes back to kind of demystifying things. This is really not that difficult, and I'll work with you. So yeah,
Right.
my sense is a little bit of empathy in terms of helping them get over that. That goes a long ways.
I think a lot of times the fear for those students is that I don't have somebody right in front of me and I'm just going to be left twisting in the wind. Something goes wrong and I won't know how to fix it and I'm not going to get the support I need. And I think if you can allay those fears, that goes a long way for them to open up and actually enjoy and embrace the experience.
I noticed you have a green screen behind you. Do you use that green screen to put different things up to kind of aid in the educational experience?
Yeah, I will have kind of recorded lectures, and what I can do is I can kind of set a bunch of PowerPoints or whatever I want to use as my presentation device, and then I can have those playing behind me. I'll set myself up as a little talking head in the corner, and then have the kind of the main bullet points sort of up behind me.
Dan, you were the online training director. What kind of communication challenges did that present?
Yeah, so um, I was interested in computers, and so when the opportunity came to start introducing some level of online presence to the college, I kind of jumped at the opportunity. And so I think the challenges came in that position with preparing the faculty for what they needed to be able to do, what base skills that they needed to have, and then how to translate those skills into the software we're using at the time. We've now migrated through a few different softwares, uh, uh, learning management systems. But once people had sort of a base level of comfort, then making the transition is like, okay, this can probably do mostly the same things. Here's how it's different. But there were a lot of kind of classes where I would stand up in front of people, make demonstrations, have them try to try it out. And so that was not that different from dealing with students who were also nervous about it. You had some faculty who were naturals and felt comfortable and took off without much guidance, and you had some faculty who you really needed to sit one-on-one with and kind of walk them through what they needed to do. And sometimes you need to do that semester after semester after semester, but eventually that all evened out and everybody feels comfortable. And now when the COVID pandemic hit, we all had an online presence. Even classes that met face to face every week still had an online presence, so that students could go there, see what the material was going to be. Here are your handouts. Here's an outline of what our content is going to be over the semester. So everybody had experience with it. So the transition of having to say, well, we need to do a lot more online, I think was a lot easier for us than for a lot of schools.
And how has kind of the amount of online teaching changed from pre-COVID to post-COVID?
Well, it's greatly increased. I think like like the work environment, it was discovered that a lot can be done from home. Everything doesn't have to revolve around, what time can you go into class. Part of our initial transition from going from traditional face-to-face classes to fully online classes were these hybrid classes, and people would come in from a couple of times a semester just to check in, kind of get their bearings, have an opportunity to ask questions face to face, that sort of thing. And one of the times I was doing this, I asked the class, it's like, how many people would prefer to have a face-to-face class every week? And about half the class raised their hands. And it's like, and all right, so of you people, how many people could meet at this time every week? And almost nobody raised their hands. So there is, while you can say there are some things that are not as good in a face-to-face class, the spontaneity that you can have, the presence, the feel of that instant sort of feedback that you get from the people you're talking to. You don't have that necessarily in online environment, but the online environment also affords you to have more people involved than could have been involved before, and it gives everybody an equal footing. So in those face-to-face classes, when you have that same half dozen people talking, no matter how you're trying to coax people into it, they're not talking. But you can set up assignments, a discussion board or something like that, where everybody's got an equal voice. And now the quietest, the shyest person in the class, their voice is just as loud and just as valuable as the person who was going to speak every single time there was an opportunity to speak in a face-to-face class. So there's advantages and disadvantages, but definitely a little bit different.
So can you talk a little bit about the technology tools that are used in teaching today?
Well, I think you have there's an abundance of resources out there. There's there's editing software that allows you to create something and then change it up. So if my early experiences with creating lectures was that I would record a lecture and I would then post it to YouTube or some other site, and then I would embed that into the class so that they don't have to go to YouTube in order to get it. The technology keeps advancing, so now I can just record right from the learning management system, and so that makes it's easier to create a quick announcement. It feels more present, I think. Because people are seeing you talk to them on a regular basis, and everything doesn't have to be a long lecture, which is a lot more production time for me. But sometimes you just want to remind people of something, and you'd rather do it where they see you talking to them about stuff rather than having them have to watch a long lecture or read something that you've scripted for them.
What is a common myth about teaching that you'd like to share?
I think a common myth is that those who can't teach. And it's not that that's never true. I think it is true sometimes. Some people are not very good practitioners, but they're good teachers. And I think that there are some people who are good teachers or people who are good teachers and are also good practitioners. I think there's probably also some people who are not very good practitioners and they're also not very good teachers. So I think these two, that there is some sort of a link between these two things is probably the myth that could be busted. It is possible to be good at both or bad at both or good at one and not the other, but there's no predictable connection between them.
What advice would you give your younger self, or maybe a younger teacher, somebody who's moving into education, with your many years of experience? What kind of advice would you give yourself or someone else?
I would say be over prepared. Be prepared with more material than you think you could possibly get through. Um, for a couple of reasons. It allows you to handle more of those unexpected questions that come up because you have a depth of knowledge. You've anticipated that there are more things that you might want to talk about besides the high priority things that you've listed. And then I think also that it allows you to have a comfort that you're not going to all of a sudden run short of material. There are times when I have classes that are so engaged that you have struggling to try to get through the material because people want to just keep talking about stuff. And other times where it's like nobody has a question, nobody has anything, and you just burn through what you thought was going to take you the whole time, and now you're left with extra time, at the end. Nobody wants to be worried about, oh my God, I'm going to finish up this, this many minutes early. What am I going to do with my time while you're trying to finish the material? So I think if you know that you have a depth of material, you have extra things that you can talk about, you have something that you can fall back on, I think it makes you more comfortable as you're presenting. And I think you'll never look like you're ill prepared in front of the students or the people who are your audience.
It's interesting. That's consistent with my experience in business as well, which is know your content, have a great deal of it, but don't share all of it, but have something in reserve to so that you can dive into questions, but B, deal with variations and just kind of read the room. But sometimes people, they put all their content on a slide and they just read it and there's nothing else there. And but know what you're talking about is the most important thing. Everything else, if you have deep knowledge, and you have a lot of other material to go to, that will cover a lot of mistakes that you might make in the course of a presentation. If you come across as knowledgeable, people are willing to go with you. But if you don't have the content, don't have the knowledge, then people maybe not as engaged.
I think you mentioned something which is significant, and I guess it's a known thing, but that doesn't mean everybody pays attention to it. But don't put everything on a slide. It's if you're supposed to be the content expert, if you're supposed to be delivering material, you may want to have a few punch points up there that will help us. Okay, we're going to talk about this, we're going to talk about that. But you want them still engaged with you. You don't want them engaged with the slide thinking, well, this guy's just reading off the slide. So, am I supposed to be listening to him? Am I supposed to be reading the slide? It's a duplication of material. I would say fewer slides, less on them, but pick the things that are most valuable, the highest priority things you want them to take away from this. I would say you put that on your slide, and then you can talk in greater depth about it because people will still be paying attention to you while just kind of hitting those bullets.
Yeah, I agree. The talking points, the bullets, kind of just guiding the narration, but you got to be able to share a whole lot more than is up there. If you're just reading off the slides, then people go, well, why do I even bother showing up? Just send me the slide deck and I'll read it. So
Yeah.
anyhow, last question. Are there any presentation teaching techniques that you found to be particularly good or bad in working with students?
Well, I think I try to maintain a conversational attitude in a conversational presentation, so that I want people to feel free to interrupt me. I want to engage them by asking questions, getting them to consider things, even if it might be a rhetorical question. And I can joke that that's a rhetorical question. I don't really want an answer, but you can be playful as long as you continue to deliver valuable information. If you're playful because you're stalling for time, that's a bad thing. But you can be yourself, be genuine, be yourself. And if you have a sense of humor, then go ahead and use it, but don't force it. I would say invite them into the experience rather than make them passive listeners. They're just along for the ride, and they may doze off somewhere along the way. But if you can keep them as active participants, I think that is a big advantage.
Awesome. Thank you. Since you've made it this far, I just want to take a moment to thank you for listening all the way through and to express my appreciation to you for following another episode of Verbal Impact. I want to thank today's guest, Assistant Professor Dan Kleber, with whom we discussed many of the elements of effective presentations in an educational environment, including challenges in working with today's students, some of the presentation skills that are most important for a teacher in higher education, and the techniques that are used in today's online teaching environment. Don't forget to check out our various social media channels, including YouTube, under the name Presentelligence. That's Presentelligence, Presentelligence.